It's important that when using a breast pump, the flange size that you're using is the correct fit. So how do you know if you're this size or somewhere in between? Today I'm sitting down with Diana West. She's a IBCLC. She's been in private practice for over 20 years and she's the author of a few books. So she was the perfect person to talk about this. Join me today as we talk about flange size. Diana West is here from Pump and Pal to help us to understand when the flange is the right size, when it's not, and what can happen if either of those is the case. So thank you so much, Diana. Can we start out just by talking about right off the bat, how would we know if the flange was too big?
Absolutely. Hi, Valerie. Thank you so much for letting me join. And just to put it out there and let folks know, I'm an international board certified lactation consultant. I've been in practice for about 20 years and the author of a few books. So I've been doing this for a while. I joined Pump and Pal about a year ago, and I had already been very familiar with their flanges, having used them in private practice with my clients. Always really liked them. But then they invented a new kind of flange and they brought me in initially and then one other IBCLC to help understand more about the flanges and how to work with them. So in sizing, we actually look at things a little bit differently than some other flange companies do. So I really want to be clear that I am talking not so much generally for every flange out there as our flanges, and some of that can be translated to other flanges, but I don't want to overgeneralize.
Okay. And just to open the door with that most people are sitting there with their brand new pump that they probably received,
Yeah,
and there's one or two flanges in there. There are other choices, as you'll tell us, from Pump and Pal. There's other choices from pump manufacturers. Just realizing that that's like the average size.
absolutely. Yeah, well, when I actually pumped exclusively myself for 14 months with my first child, and I am so ancient that was the very first year the very first Medela pump and style came out. And
Woo.
it only came with the 24 flange, and like any mother out there, and I think pretty much everybody at the time, all anyone ever had was a 24 millimeter. So I pumped away with that, and it turns out, TMI, but I have tiny nipples and probably would have needed something more like a 13 had
Okay.
I been properly sized. So that could have really helped with my pumping yield had I known.
Because the reality is it changes. Having the correct pump size changes how much milk you're getting, the message that you're
Absolutely.
sending your body to make more milk, that you need the milk you have.
Right.
So in kind of unpacking this and understanding, I think we could go either way here, and let's kind of paint the picture for everyone. What does it look like if your flange, do you want to start with bigger or smaller?
Absolutely.
You let me know.
Well, in general, what I want to say is that nipples do swell in flanges. That is unavoidable. So sometimes what people see is that their nipple swells, touches the side, and they say, oh, I need to go larger. You'll just swell more in a larger flange. I've seen people with the size 13 tiny little nipples go up to a size 30 millimeter flange, hoping to get away from all the swelling so that their nipple will not touch the sides of the flange. So the first thing to know is that that's not generally, it's not a criteria to worry about in and of itself, because everybody will swell to a certain extent. What we're trying to do, though, is minimize how much swelling there is. When the nipple swells, it puts, as you can imagine, it puts pressure inside the nipple, which then puts pressure on the outside of the ducts and can make it harder for the milk to flow. So by minimizing how much swelling there is, we keep the ducts able to flow as well as possible, which helps with milk removal. So that's
Okay.
the first criteria we're looking at. When the nipple is first in the flange, how much space is around the nipple? I'm going to give you the criteria we use, as I mentioned, with Pump and Pal. I want you to know that as far as I know, there's no research behind this, so it's just kind of hard-won experience. But what we find is, and this is a precise measurement, but about 1/8 of an inch, which, I had that translated to millimeters at one time. If you're a millimeter person, just do the translation.
Right.
But an
And
eighth
you're talking about, just to cut
around
you,
the
this is,
nipple.
the pump is not on. You have
Correct.
your breast in the flange. The pump is not on.
Exactly. Let me pull out. So this is just a regular standard flange, not one of ours. It's a Spectra one. And if I just put a nipple right inside like that, you can see how much space there is around the nipple. Way
Okay.
too much. So if this little knit breast, which is so cute, if it had a larger nipple and there was only about an eighth of an inch around, I would think it's a good fit. But seeing that it's smaller, that's the first thing we're looking for. During pumping, as I mentioned before, once the vacuum is on the nipple, it generally will make the nipple swell more. So it's before there's any pumping that we're measuring. A lot of people will measure. There's places where you can print out a measurement and measure nipple at rest.
Some of
And
them look like if you're feeding spaghetti to a certain number of people.
yes,
Have you seen that thing?
exactly. And that can be a very useful technique. I personally find it difficult to measure and know which is nipple and which is just the sides of the connective tissue. And
Right.
sometimes the transition into the areola is not clear. So seeing how it looks at an actual flange to me is more useful. So that's the first starting point. Then we also want to look at what's happening during pumping. In addition to the swelling aspect, some people find that their nipples stretch during pumping.
Okay.
And then you actually might have more room initially until it swells more. But that stretching, where the nipple tissue is actually going toward the end of the tunnel, eventually compresses the milk ducts. So that also can reduce milk flow, even if the flange fits well otherwise. So
Okay.
that's another separate issue, and that's where our special product for silicone flanges comes in to address elastic tissue.
Okay.
Most
So
of those,
before we get into elastic tissue, which I think is so
yeah,
important, because we don't want to be, so much goes into these new moms who are so tired, are setting this time aside to pump, and you want to make the most of that time and make sure that your body's getting a clear message and nothing's being smushed where it shouldn't be. So
right.
we talked about, now if you put your nipple into the flange, there's more than an eighth of an inch, we know, okay, this seems like this flange is too big.
Right, go down.
What is the point where we say this flange is too small?
When you can't get your nipple in the flange.
Okay, the pump is not on, you go to put your breast on into the flange and you're like trying to jam it in there.
Now, I want to always caveat this because I don't like hard and fast rules because there's always going to be an exception.
For sure.
And the one thing that I really want to put out there is if you find that something is giving you good results, even though it doesn't look great on paper, go with it as long as you're not causing pain. But on the other end of the spectrum, if everything looks right on paper, it should be right, but you're not getting milk, there's still not something right. So keep
right. And this recording this is coming as a result of the followers that I have saying, like, I'm doing what we're talking about and I'm still not seeing it. What else is going on? And that's where we want to take this deeper dive in to better understand that. So let's go ahead and talk about that elastic nipple tissue and understanding that whole situation.
We don't understand exactly what the dynamics are in terms of the dermal tissue. That's more for us to understand as we develop our learning around this product. But let me back up around how it came to be and what we're trying to address. So it was exactly what you were just describing, where people were saying, I'm doing everything right, but I'm not getting much milk. I do notice that my nipple stretches a lot in the flange. And my boss, John Gillen, heard this, and he heard it over and over and over from so many people. He thought, I wonder if there's something out there that would hold the tissue in place so it doesn't stretch too far to close off milk ducts. He spent 2 years developing a silicone product. The interior is a special surface that holds it, has a little resistance. I can lift my finger out of it. But if I press down and try to pull back, there's resistance. And that's the surface that then holds the tissue. It's not sticky. It's not like some of those old toys where they would be, that you'd lift off a pattern. I may be dating myself here.
Right.
Silly putty sort of stuff that grips. It just holds the tissue in place so it doesn't stretch.
Right.
Now,
Because what we're talking about here, and if for people who are watching this and have never pumped, pumping, the first time you pump, you're like, holy mackerel, what is going on here? I didn't even know my body could do that. So your nipple is going to move into that tunnel.
Absolutely.
But what you're talking about here is where more than the nipple is moving into.
When it's going almost to the end of the tunnel.
Right.
Now, to be very clear, and I do lecture at conferences about nipple anatomy and physiology, one thing that's just normal, I mean, these are not nipples that are abnormal. This is just more stretching than this pump can accommodate. It is normal for nipple tissue to be elastic, to be stretchable. It's supposed to be. Babies, when they nurse, they move all around and take the nipple with them. And that's just all part of it. It generally doesn't hurt. And this process of the nipple stretching in the tunnel isn't necessarily painful. It's just that it closes off the milk duct, so it eventually can reduce milk production because less is being removed.
Right. Okay. And it all goes back to everything I talk about constantly, which is if your body's not removing the milk, then they think the baby doesn't need that much milk anymore. And that's why we want to be sure that your body's getting this loud and clear. Okay. Is there anything else when it comes to phalange size or anything else that you want to mention as far as this is concerned, Diana?
Breast size is not very important. Yes. A lot of people have some of our customers, I should say, have worried that the flanges may not fit them because they have very large breasts. We generally find that doesn't matter at all in terms of fitting the flange to the nipple. It's all about the nipple itself, not the actual breast size. Having said that, there are some breast shapes that we can use the flange a little bit differently to get out more milk, depending on how the nipple points or the shape. There's some accommodations there. The other factor that I hear a lot about that I really would like to address is the areola and where it is. Some people say areola, I say areola.
So do I.
Fine. A lot of people worry about the areola going too much into the flange. Typically what that's showing is the nipple is going too far into the flange. The areola doesn't have much to do with milk removal, so it's just an indication of how much tissue is there overall.
Okay.
And then people worry a lot of times in our flanges that even the ones that are hard plastic, they're graduated. They're not as abrupt a transition. So with that, you're going to see what looks like more areola, but the tunnel actually only starts there.
Okay.
So it's truly nothing to worry about. It's all about what that nipple's doing inside the tunnel.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It's the same way as when we talk about breast size having nothing to do with your ability to produce. My little breasts have fed twins, and it's just the way your body, it's
absolutely
it's a supply and demand system. So, and I do think, and I'll put a link below to the Pump and Pow website, but what is so unique and what just years ago when I connected with Pump and Pow was that material, that the silicone being so different than that hard plastic. And so just as another option for people.
It's a game changer. It has really transformed so many people's pumping experiences. There's a few things about it. You don't see the nipple moving, and that just really worries people sometimes because they're so used to a nipple moving a lot in a flange. Right. And because that special silicone is holding the nipple in place, only the very rounded part that's not in contact with the flange, the tip of the nipple, will be moving. And that's what we want.
That's what you want. It's just not what
open.
A lot. So I think that's why it can be confusing. Diana, thank you so much for answering these questions. And I'm sure we'll see much more of you. Thanks so much.